In Washington, Polk impatiently awaits news from Fremont, hoping California's settlers will rise up on their own. He knows Congress won't approve a war with Mexico unless the U.S. is attacked. Tired of waiting, Polk sends the army to a disputed border between Texas and Mexico, certain he can provoke Mexico to strike first.
How many men in the 5th Regiment?
Polk was waiting for Mexico to rise to the bait and attack American forces. He believed that any war fought was going to result in more territory for the United States.
On April 25, 1846, convinced American troops are invading, Mexico assaults a U.S. patrol, killing 11, giving Polk exactly the provocation he needs.
Polk went to Congress and he said, "American blood has been shed on American soil, and despite our best efforts to prevent war with Mexico, they have attacked us." Now, this was a lie. In fact, the land in question was not American land.
I won't say that this is the only instance in American history in which, let's say, we fudged some things in order to get something we wanted through an act of aggression, but this is certainly a great example.
Mere weeks after the attack, the U.S. declares war on Mexico. In California, Fremont receives a message from Polk. His mission is no longer secret. It's time to attack. Fremont equips a ragtag army with rifles, then marches toward present-day Sonoma. His goal, win California for Polk at any cost. Following orders from President Polk, John Fremont leads a militia of 100 men south. His mission: seize California for the U.S. He plans first to attack Sonoma, the largest settlement in Northern California. Then he hopes to continue south to Monterey, Los Angeles, and finally San Diego.
Let's go!
The Americans are relatively few in number, but because of John C. Fremont, they're going to make their presence known much more loudly than their numbers would indicate.
Relying on grit and determination, Fremont and Kit Carson begin their improbable conquest.
If there's one thing that marks John C. Fremont, it's his ambition. He was driven to succeed, he was driven to be independent, and I think the frontier for John C. Fremont represented the route to secure his ambition. Notoriety, fame, wealth. That's what California offered.
As word of Fremont's revolt begins to spread, other settlers join the fight. They call themselves Los Osos, Spanish for the bears. On June 14, 1846, Fremont's fighters reach Sonoma, but are surprised to find the Mexican outpost virtually undefended. They capture it in what becomes known as the Bear Flag Revolt. To mark their victory, they raise a makeshift flag, made from a cotton sheet and decorated with a red grizzly bear. The design will later inspire the state flag of California.
All right, let's go!
This revolt that begins to emerge, it was enough of a movement to take hold, at least in Northern California, and to start this process of the American conquest of California.
In just 2 months, with few casualties, Fremont and Carson conquer most of California's coast.
Under the direction of Fremont, this rabble of guys that have accomplished this great feat. Never before in history had so much terrain been won with so little conflict, with so little bloodshed, and won by such a small party of individuals.
Polk's plan to win California seems to be working, but without communication, he has no idea if Fremont and Carson are even alive. To hedge his bets, he dispatches a cavalry force from Texas, led by General Stephen Kearny.
Stephen Watts Kearny has been an officer. He's known Lewis and Clark, and Polk orders him west to go and capture Santa Fe and then continue on down the Rio Grande and eventually strike westward to California.
In early August 1846, Fremont and Carson reach Los Angeles. After joining forces with U.S. Marines sent by Polk, they seize the city, and with it, the final Mexican stronghold in California.
It's kind of incredible. Fremont took California against relatively light resistance. It fell into American hands, partly because of the skill and bravery of someone like John C. Fremont, but partly because of pure good fortune, because it was there for the taking.
It was at that point Fremont assumed that California was theirs, that they had taken it. They believed that Mexicans weren't really good soldiers. They believed that they were sort of indifferent politically, and they took this as a sign that California was theirs.
Fremont, always ambitious, wants to share his good news with Polk quickly.
Fremont decides now is the time to let Washington know what has happened, to let Polk know what has happened, to sort of solidify the victory. Fremont was interested in expanding his own celebrity, making this conquest part of his own personal story. Fremont decides to send a courier east. Who am I going to hire to do this? Well, why not the most competent and pragmatic, strongest member of my expedition, Kit Carson.
Adept at survival, Carson picks the fastest route possible, even though it means crossing hundreds of miles. It's been 2 months since John Fremont dispatched Kit Carson east to Washington in a race to deliver the news that they've taken California. But Carson's mission has changed. Now he's heading back west, leading General Kearny's troops to San Diego.
Stephen Kearny was the commander of the American Army of the West. He was sent by Polk to advance into Mexican territory to secure California for the United States.
And Kit Carson is saying, don't worry about California. Fremont's already captured California. Well, Kearny's in a little bit of a quandary. He's been told to do this. He's a good military officer. He's going to follow orders.
The slow-moving army takes 8 weeks to retrace Carson's steps through the Sonoran Desert. Kearny sends Carson ahead to scout the best route. "50 miles outside of San Diego, Carson discovers that Mexico is far from defeated, and its army is on the move.
They get near San Diego. Carson rides ahead, and wait a minute, California is not conquered. Everything is kind of turned around now. The Americans have lost ground.
Initially, Fremont's troops encountered almost no resistance, taking towns from Sausalito to Los Angeles. But now the Mexican army has surged north, reclaiming the territory, and Fremont is trying to regroup.
Fremont sends Carson back to basically say, we've won, and everybody should celebrate. Well, those greetings were a little bit premature.
Essentially, the Mexican army had regrouped and reorganized, ready to defend their land.
How many of them were there?
100, maybe more. Well mounted, too.
Kearny's men have marched from Santa Fe, New Mexico. His men are cold and tired. It's raining. His powder is wet. And despite all of this, Kearny thinks he can engage with the Mexican army.
We have to attack. You with me?
Yes, sir.
Carson was the sort of guy you would want to have on your side if you were in a firefight. He has an incredible violent streak. He was a violent man even for his times. Once he perceived that this was a violent situation he was about to enter into, he went for the jugular.
Kearny completely underestimates the Mexican presence. And there's disorganization amongst the Americans, a bit of overzealousness, and the result is Kearny's men get stretched out, and the Mexicans are able to take advantage of this.
Carson is momentarily unconscious. Then he stands up, he finds his rifle. And he begins to pick off the enemy one by one. It's classic Carson. Carson grew up with a gun in his hand. He could shoot straight. He was calm, he was composed. He would dispatch you as quickly as possible. He would talk about a firefight. He would say, that was the prettiest fight I ever saw. almost like a mafia killer.
The Mexicans suffered some wounded. But it's this point that Carney realizes he's in trouble.
Carney himself is nearly killed in this conflict. It's nip and tuck whether they're going to survive this thing.
Retreat! Retreat!
They have to regroup and create a perimeter, and it's the beginning of a siege, basically. The siege at San Pascual goes on for several days, and Carney realizes that they're not going to survive this. They don't have enough food and water and ammunition to hold out much longer. What he needs to do is find out whether there are any other American forces in the area.
How many troops do you think are still out there?
More than we've got.
You need to sneak someone through enemy lines. Get word to San Diego.
I'll do it.
There's a belief that somewhere near San Diego is the U.S. Navy and the Marines. And if he can get reinforcements and get help, that they might be able to break the siege. So again, who raises his hand? It's Carson. I'll do it. Whenever there's a risky mission into enemy territory, he's the guy that raises his hand.
But San Diego is 40 miles away. And no one knows if help is there, or if Carson will survive the journey. Kit Carson has just volunteered for a mission that could cost his life. To save General Carney's trapped army, he'll try to reach U.S. Marines he hopes are in San Diego.
You have to imagine the danger inherent in this mission. Carson has to sneak through Mexican lines, through enemy territory, through hills, rock and cactus and thorns. It is an unforgiving environment, and he's not on a horse. He's on hands and knees.
He's got to now make his way across this expanse of desert with prickly pear and all kinds of cactus. He is traveling in enemy territory. It's just another one of the exploits that contributes to the mythology of Kit Carson as this kind of incredibly plucky, self-reliant guy.
Against all odds, Kit Carson reaches San Diego in one day.
Halt! Who goes there? Hold your fire! Wait, I'm an American. General Kearney sent me. The Mexican army has his entire battalion surrounded.
What?
About 35 miles back across the desert.
By the time he makes it to American lines, his feet are all torn up. He's lacerated. He can't walk. This is one of the great feats in American history.
After a brief reprieve, Carson returns to San Pasqual with 200 reinforcements. As they approach General Kearny's position, their opposition scatters.
The sight of these approaching Marines, very well armed, was enough to scatter the Mexican soldiers. They didn't want any part of this.
Carson learns Kearny has survived, and now intends to continue his mission.
We'll make straight for San Diego, resupply, then on to Los Angeles.
You think we can take it?
We'll see.
As he prepares to leave, Carson is unaware his friend John C. Fremont is alive and planning his own mission.
Carson hadn't seen Fremont in a long time now. He didn't know if Fremont was alive or dead.
He's near Monterey, trying to gather an army to retake Southern California. By late November, he's amassed a force of more than 400 men. Determined to reconquer Los Angeles and burnish his reputation, Fremont heads south. At the same time, Kearny and Carson plan their own route north. Between them, the Mexican army. At stake, control of California and the final piece of American Western expansion. President James K. Polk is determined to seize California. But his plan depends on the outcome of a battle erupting 3,000 miles away. Los Angeles is Mexico's final stronghold in the territory. A prize the Americans want to reclaim. John Fremont closes in from the north. As Kit Carson and General Kearny move to attack.
Think about Los Angeles. You have Kearny approaching from the south. And Fremont was advancing along the coastal range and controlled the Cahuenga Pass. There wasn't really anywhere for the Mexican army to go.
Kearny's army arrives first. and overwhelms the enemy, defeating them in a matter of hours.
The combined force of Kearny's soldiers and some American volunteers pin the Mexican army down between Fremont's advancing army from the north and their combined force in the south. The Mexican army realizes, look, we're surrounded, and decided that it was time to capitulate.
The U.S. flag is raised over Los Angeles. But the war isn't over.
Polk had basically gotten what he wanted. California was in American hands. New Mexico was in American hands. Texas was secured, and Polk decided it was time for the war to end. Unfortunately, Mexicans had no interest in ending the war. They were angry, and they refused to come to terms.
To force Mexico's hand, Polk launches an invasion.
Grabbing California, the United States actually had to land an army on the coast of Mexico at Veracruz and then march up and take Mexico City.
The resulting treaty finally pushes the frontier to the western coast. Fulfilling the dream of building a nation that spans from the Atlantic to the Pacific.
American expansionism, this is something that has been on the agenda right from the American Revolution with Daniel Boone. So what we see in 1840s is a fulfillment of the promise of the founding fathers and even the colonists who arrive and go out there to get their piece of the American landmass.
The Empire of Liberty, first imagined by Thomas Jefferson and championed by Andrew Jackson, is achieved by the unlikeliest of leaders, James Polk.
President Polk is one of our most underrated presidents. I mean, this was a very powerful man, a guy with very clear intentions. When Polk assumed office, he looked west and he saw all that land and he said, you know what, I want it all. It was really one of the greatest land grabs in the history of the world, to take that whole western third of the continent and to get it all in one generation.
If you want to understand how important Polk's presidency was, just consider this. California, if it were an independent country, would be the 5th largest economy on Earth. Imagine American history without California. And then imagine Mexican history with California. The history of the entire world would be different.